So in this video I will be talking on Pachelbel's famous Ciacona in F minor. We will dive into some facts of his life, relationship with J.S.Bach, and dive into some aspects of the work itself. That's coming up. So hello everybody and welcome to a new episode of Afterthoughts. My name is Wim Winters, and actually a few weeks ago now I have recorded Pachelbel's Ciacona in F minor, the video with my two kids and Evelyn again dancing. Pachelbel is a composer of which I should know much more, and so do not consider me as a reliable source, so to say, on all the facts of Pachelbel and the music tradition of his time. I'm just about to find out. I'm of course much more focused to J.S. Bach and the later period towards the Viennese music with Mozart and Beethoven. But since Pachelbel was of great influence of J.S. Bach, I wanted to try it on clavichord. I dived into his music, so there will be much more of Pachelbel on the channel in the coming months, years, and along with that I will study his music and his background more. So just give you a few initial thoughts on this piece and on Pachelbel in general. So I looked it up, and there is actually an interesting Wikipedia article of which I will put a link below, that of which I took some aspects. So for those of you who are not familiar with the life of Pachelbel at all, he was born in 1653 in Nuremberg, where he died in 1706. Remember, that's a generation before J.S. Bach, so we are actually deep in the 17th century. So Pachelbel studied in Altdorf und Regensburg, and the authorities were so impressed by his talent that he was permitted to study music outside the gymnasium. And his teacher, which is interesting, was Caspar Prenz, but that Prenz was a student from Johann Caspar, so not a small name. And that Mr. Carroll was influenced on his turn by Italian composers. So Pachelbel moved to Vienna in 1673, where he became assistant organist of the St. Stephen's Dome. And Vienna was much influenced by the Italian culture in those days, and knew great musicians even before Pachelbel, like Froberger and Muffat. And he stayed there for 5 years, 1677, so I'm not used to the 17th century dates, but you can hear. Pachelbel became court organist in Eisenach, which is of course very close to the Bach family. And he met members of the Bach family. We go into that in a minute. 1 year later he became organist in Erfurt, where he stayed for 12 years, and there he established his fame and name as one of the leading organists of his time, South German organist, because you had also a northern tradition with Buxtehude and Böhm and Reinken and others. So he then moved to Stuttgart, Goethe, and finally Nuremberg again, where authorities gave him actually what would we call today a pension. So interesting also, there's much more to be read in the article on Wikipedia, and it's actually a very good article, I think, so you can rely on that. I cannot point to some books directly published recently that gives details on the life of Pachelbel, but we're going to do book reviews in the future, so you will probably see one or more books on Pachelbel coming on these episodes on this channel. So moving on to relationship with Bach, and of course that's very interesting to me and probably to you as well. So there is a connection between Pachelbel and Ambrosius Bach, and if you have the biography of J.S. Bach by Christoph Wolff, you find a lot of details. And in that book regarding Pachelbel and Bach. So J.S. Bach's father, Ambrosius Bach, became was a friendship between those two, Pachelbel, when they worked actually kind of together in Eisenach, and the families got very well along with each other, and Pachelbel actually became godfather of the daughter, actually the sister of J.S. Bach, Johanna Juditha. And Pachelbel as well and this is interesting, would teach Christoph Bach, which was the elder brother of J.S. Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, and was the one who took his younger brother in his house when both of their parents died. So actually, that Christoph Bach is the first teacher, so to say, of J.S. Bach, and Christoph Bach was a student of Pachelbel. So the influence from Pachelbel on young Bach was really immense, even before Bach went to Lüneburg and to Buxtehude. So also with this Christoph Bach, the older brother, he studied at Pachelbel's with Pachelbel, so he had scores from Pachelbel, which he probably had to buy, and it was not Bach, the young Bach, J.S. Bach, was not allowed to copy them. So there is the romantic story that we found in the necrology of Bach, of J.S. Bach, that he had to stood up at night and copy them actually by moonlight. With his small hands, he could read in the cabinet for the scores. But anyway, so to say that Pachelbel was of huge influence, and actually the knowledge on the earliest works of J.S. Bach there is not so much preserved, probably as Emanuel Bach would do later. Also, Father Bach probably had destroyed much of his very young works, and there is some works preserved in the collection, which is, I have written it correctly here, in the Neumeister, that is Neumeister collection, some choral works, probably before 1700, and if I'm right, well informed, and I remember well, it's still in tabulature notation. So that's the old form of notation which actually was not used anymore in the 18th century. The fact that Bach was really in that close contact with the tradition of Pachelbel in his very young years must have been of huge influence. So, then coming to his music of Pachelbel, and this variation. I play from the Berenreiter edition. You might know this one. I'm not familiar with a more recent one. I haven't looked it up, I have to admit that. It's not a bad edition, I think, but it's not the best you can imagine. And since it is translated, so to say, from a tablature, you have probably more options than one. So I would really be interested in knowing if there is a kind of Urtext edition that's available of being prepared. You have two Berenreiter editions, one in the 30s, and this is the upgraded version, I think, made in the 70s, 74. So here you have the score with a pedal version, which makes sense, because Pachelbel probably had access, or not certainly had access to organs where the function of the pedal board was not as important as in Buxtehude's region, so north of Germany. Might be one of the reasons that young Bach was attracted more to Lüneburg and less to southern Germany, where Christoph Bach, so his older brother, actually wanted to send him to become a student of a pupil of Pachelbel. Instead, young Bach moved to Lüneburg and then was influenced by the northern German organ style. So the pedals boards that Pachelbel had in southern Germany were not the large one where you can play trio sonatas on, but the smaller one. So this can be played on a relatively small pedal board, and it makes sense because there are fragments, like for instance in this variation, where it is quite difficult to play it all on manual. You have here this sixth. And actually I left out one note. Here's an F, which is too difficult to play on manual because that's too wide. Apart from the instrument choice, which I don't know, it sounds wonderful on this large unfretted clavichord, which is also something that surprises me. Because if you go back, Froberger, that's the same, that sounds really great, but even Buxtehude, I would feel that in some way or another a fretted instrument would, and somehow does a better job. If you would go much earlier to music of Sweelinck, really 1 century ago, before, then this instrument doesn't work anymore. They should show you, but it's really, it makes no sense of playing that on such a large 18th century clavichord, but this music, it does. And then the effect that goes along with that music, that's the last thing that really surprised me, because it felt so modern. And I mean modern in the sense of the 18th century, kind of Empfindsamkeit. I mean, this is really telling a story. It's a kind of 18th century emotion that you would find in the work of J.S. Bach and going forward to Emanuel Bach. At the same time, I must say that in these kind of Ciacona kind of movements, you have also 17th century works that have this kind of melancholical feel, but anyway, it's much different than the Northern German music. And again, see what I'm saying now just as a first-hand thought of somebody who is revisiting these works of Pachelbel, and just by being focused so much on J.S. Bach, going back opens connections, of course, from one music to another. So, okay, I hope you had some useful elements out of this from Pachelbel's life, the connection with Bach, my personal initiation actually again in this music. There was not too much playing today. I will definitely do more Pachelbel, and there is actually one variation series that's coming up soon in E minor, I think. Wonderful work. And in that Afterthoughts, I will go more into the music and actually performance. Okay, thank you for watching again, and thank you for subscribing as always and sharing these videos with your friends, and see you very soon again. Bye.